My name is Elizabeth, and I had just celebrated my 17th birthday when my life veered onto an unexpected and tumultuous path. Allow me to set the scene of my family, which, to an outsider, might have appeared perfectly ordinary. We lived in a modest suburban home, the kind with neatly trimmed hedges and a mailbox that always seemed slightly askew. My father, John, poured his heart and soul into his work, often returning home exhausted, but with a weary smile. My mother, Laura, stayed home, managing the household with a quiet efficiency that I rarely appreciated as a teenager. Then there was my little sister, Amy, 12 years my junior, a bright-eyed 5-year-old with an infectious giggle that could light up even the gloomiest of days. On the surface, we were a functional family, but beneath that veneer lay complexities I was only beginning to understand. My father held the position of general manager at a company owned by my maternal grandmother, Margaret. Grandma was a formidable woman, a true entrepreneur who had built her empire from the ground up. Decades ago, she started with a small chain of laundromats, her hands often stained with detergent and her mind buzzing with ambition. Over time, she expanded her business into manufacturing household chemicals and detergents, supplying laundries across the region. Her company became a local success story, a testament to her relentless drive. When Grandma decided to retire, she offered the reins of the business to my mother. Mom, however, had no interest in the corporate world, preferring the rhythm of home life over boardroom battles. Dad, ever the opportunist, stepped in to fill the void, taking over as the company's leader. At first, this seemed like a natural transition, but it marked the beginning of a rift that would soon tear our family apart. I vividly recall the day everything unraveled. I was holed up in my bedroom, a cozy space cluttered with posters and textbooks, struggling to focus on a particularly tedious algebra assignment. The muffled sound of raised voices drifted up from the living room. My mother's voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the air. "You're nothing but a failure, John. This is my house, my family's business. You should be grateful I even let you touch it." Her words were like daggers, and I could only imagine the look on Dad's face. I pressed my ear against the door, my heart pounding, but the rest of their argument dissolved into a cacophony of accusations and slammed doors. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in our home grew increasingly tense. Mom and Dad barely exchanged words, and when they did, it inevitably escalated into a shouting match that left the house feeling like a battlefield. I did my best to shield Amy from the chaos, distracting her with games of hide-and-seek or her favorite cartoons. But even at 5, she sensed the discord, her wide eyes searching mine for reassurance I wasn't sure I could provide. Then came the day that changed everything. I returned home from school, my backpack heavy with books and my mind preoccupied with an upcoming chemistry test. As I stepped into the living room, I froze. There, by the worn leather couch, stood my father, a suitcase at his feet. The sight of it hit me like a punch to the chest. "Dad." My voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" He crossed the room in a few strides, pulling me into a tight embrace that smelled of his familiar aftershave. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't stay here anymore. It's not good for any of us." I felt my throat constrict, my mind racing to process his words. "But what about Amy? What about me?" I pleaded, my voice trembling. Dad pulled back, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I love you both more than anything," he said, his voice breaking. "Never forget that. But sometimes, love isn't enough to fix what's broken." He kissed my forehead, a gesture that felt both tender and final, then turned to Amy, who stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bunny. Her eyes were wide with confusion. Dad knelt down, wrapping her in a hug. "Be good for your big sister, okay, Pumpkin?" he whispered. Amy nodded, too young to fully grasp the weight of the moment. And then he was gone. The front door closed with a soft thud that echoed in my chest, leaving me hollow. I stood there, staring at the empty space where he'd been, until Amy's small hand slipped into mine, anchoring me to reality. An hour later, Mom came home, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. When I told her Dad had left, her reaction stunned me. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, as if she'd been anticipating this moment. "Good riddance," she muttered under her breath, brushing past me to the kitchen. I followed, incredulous. "How can you say that?" I demanded, my voice rising. She turned to face me, her eyes cold and resolute. "Your father cheated on me, Elizabeth. Multiple times." I couldn't take it anymore. Her words hit me like a slap, and I stumbled back, grappling with the revelation. That night, as I lay in bed, the house felt eerily quiet, save for the sound of Mom's laughter drifting from her room. She was on the phone, her voice lighter than I'd heard in months. I wondered who could possibly be on the other end, but exhaustion overtook me before I could dwell on it. Just when I thought our family couldn't fracture further, Mom dropped another bombshell. One morning, as I munched on cereal at the kitchen table, she announced, "I have some news. I'm getting married." I nearly choked, milk dribbling down my chin.
"What?"
"Mom, Dad's only been gone for 2 months." She waved a hand dismissively, her engagement ring glinting in the morning light. "Sometimes, true love comes when you least expect it, Elizabeth. You'll understand when you're older." A week later, Robert moved in. He was tall, with a generic handsomeness that made people nod approvingly and say, "Oh, he seems nice." He made an effort with Amy, playing board games and helping with her kindergarten homework, which she adored. But with me, he was distant, his smiles never quite reaching his eyes. Something about him set my nerves on edge, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Meanwhile, changes were afoot at the company. Mom had taken over after Dad's departure, and she brought Robert into the fold. They made a formidable team, always huddled in the home office, poring over spreadsheets and discussing expansion plans. I tried to focus on my own life, school, friends, the occasional part-time job at the local bookstore, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense that I was becoming a stranger in my own home. The final blow came one evening when Mom and Robert sat me down at the dining table. "We're opening a new branch of the company in another city," Mom said, her tone businesslike. "It's a fantastic opportunity, so we're moving." I nodded, assuming she meant all of us, until she continued. "Robert and I have discussed it, and we think it's best if you stay here." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Stay here? Without you?" Mom's expression softened, but her words were firm. "The new house won't have much space, and you're almost done with high school. It wouldn't make sense to transfer now, right before your exams." I felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. "So, where am I supposed to live?" "On the street," I snapped, my voice shaking. "Don't be dramatic, Elizabeth," Mom scolded. "You'll stay with your grandmother. She's already agreed to it." I stared at her, hot tears prickling my eyes, then stormed to my room, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. As I collapsed onto my bed, tears streaming down my face, I couldn't shake the question, when did I become such an inconvenience to my own mother? The next few weeks were a whirlwind of packing boxes and strained goodbyes. Amy, heartbroken at leaving her friends, clung to me as we folded her clothes. "Will you come visit us, Lizzie?" she asked, her brown eyes brimming with tears. I hugged her tightly, forcing a smile. "Of course, Squirt. You can't get rid of me that easily." But inside, I felt like I was breaking. The day they left, I stood on Grandma's porch, watching the moving van pull away. Mom gave me a quick, perfunctory hug, and Robert offered an awkward nod. Amy waved from the car window, her face pressed against the glass. And then they were gone, taking a piece of my heart with them. Living with Grandma Margaret wasn't as bad as I'd feared. Her house was a charming, slightly cluttered bungalow filled with the scent of lavender and old books. She was a cool grandmother in her own way, giving me space to process my emotions but always ready with a steaming cup of chamomile tea and a listening ear when I needed to vent. Still, it wasn't home. My 18th birthday arrived sooner than I expected, and I woke up feeling oddly detached. I should have been excited, but all I felt was a hollow ache. Mom called that morning, her voice overly cheerful. "Happy birthday, sweetie. I'm sorry we can't be there." I mumbled a thank you, But as I hung up, I couldn't help but wonder how my family had unraveled so completely. I was living with my grandmother, my father was gone, and my mother and sister were building a new life without me. Yet, in the quiet moments, I found strength in Grandma's unwavering support, a reminder that even in the chaos, I wasn't entirely alone. The conversation with my mother lingered in my mind, her overly cheerful voice echoing through the phone. "Work's just crazy right now, sweetie," she'd said, promising a grand birthday celebration when they visited next month. I knew better than to hold my breath. Since Mom, Robert, and Amy had moved away, not once had they made the trip back. "Sure, Mom. Sounds great," I replied, my tone flat, masking the disappointment that had become all too familiar. Grandma Margaret must have sensed the shift in my mood because she went above and beyond to make my 18th birthday special. Her bungalow, with its creaky wooden floors and walls lined with family photos, transformed into a haven of warmth that evening. She encouraged me to invite a few close friends, Jess and Marco from my study group, who always knew how to make me laugh. Grandma ordered my favorite takeout, steaming plates of sesame chicken and fried rice from the little Chinese place downtown. She even baked a chocolate fudge cake herself, the kitchen filled with the rich aroma of cocoa and vanilla. For a few blissful hours, surrounded by laughter and the clink of soda cans, I almost forgot the chaos of the past year, the divorce, the move, the ache of being left behind. The next morning, however, brought a shift in tone. Grandma called me into her home office, a small room cluttered with files, a sturdy oak desk, and shelves overflowing with business books. Her serious expression, the one that always made my stomach twist, stopped me in my tracks. "Sit down, Elizabeth," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Is she kicking me out? Where will I go? But then, her face softened, and she reached into a drawer, pulling out a sleek leather folder. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Open it." With trembling hands, I opened the folder and nearly gasped. Inside were legal documents, the kind with embossed seals and dense text. My eyes caught the words, ownership and company. "Grandma, is this?" I stammered, barely able to form the question. She nodded, her eyes twinkling with pride. "The company is yours now, Elizabeth. I see potential in you, kiddo. You've got a sharp mind and a good heart. I know you'll do right by the business." I sat there, stunned, the weight of her words sinking in. Me, barely 18, the owner of a multi-million-dollar company that spanned laundromats and chemical manufacturing? It felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare I wasn't ready to face. "But Mom and Robert, they're running it now," I said, my voice small. Grandma's expression hardened slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "They're running a branch, dear. The main company, the heart of it all, belongs to you now." The room seemed to spin as I processed her words. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandma reached across the desk, her warm hand squeezing mine. "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you'll give it your all." I nodded, still reeling, and managed a shaky, "I will. I promise." She leaned back in her chair, satisfied, but her expression turned serious again. "One more piece of advice, Elizabeth, and I want you to listen carefully." I leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "Call your father," she said firmly. "There's more to his story than you know.
Talk to him.
Consider taking him on as a consultant if you feel it's right, but hear him out first." Her words planted a seed of curiosity and unease. What hadn't Dad told me? It took me a week to muster the courage to call him. We agreed to meet at a quaint downtown cafe, its windows fogged with steam and the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee. When I saw Dad walk in, my heart clenched. He looked older, his hair peppered with gray, his shoulders slightly stooped. But when his eyes met mine, they lit up with a warmth I hadn't seen in months. We sat in awkward silence at first, the clatter of dishes and murmured conversations filling the space between us. Then, like a dam breaking, everything poured out. Mom's remarriage, the move, Grandma's astonishing gift. Dad listened, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions: regret, pride, sorrow. When I finished, he took a deep breath, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee mug. "Lizzie, there's something you need to know about the divorce." His voice was heavy, and what followed shook me to my core. He described how Mom had never respected him, her constant criticism, calling him a loser, belittling his every effort, chipping away at his confidence. One night, after a particularly brutal argument, he'd gotten drunk and made a terrible mistake. "I cheated on her," he admitted, his voice thick with shame. "Just once. I regretted it immediately, but your mother used it as a weapon. She threatened to sue, to take everything, the house, the business, you, and Amy. She demanded I leave, give her the property, even wanted alimony." I sat there, stunned, my coffee growing cold. "Why didn't you fight it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Dad's eyes met mine, filled with a sadness that pierced my heart. "Because of you and Amy. I didn't want you to go through a messy, public divorce. I thought leaving would be easier for you both." His words shifted something inside me, lifting a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my father back. Before we parted, I took a deep breath and asked, "Dad, how would you feel about helping me with the company? As a consultant, maybe?" The smile that spread across his face was answer enough, bright and genuine, like the dad I remembered from better days. The months that followed were a whirlwind. I juggled studying for exams, late-night cram sessions, and learning the ropes of the company with Dad's guidance over video calls. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage at my high school graduation, diploma in hand, the crowd's applause ringing in my ears. Grandma sat in the audience, beaming with pride, her floral dress a splash of color in the sea of faces. Mom and Robert were conspicuously absent, but I'd learned to temper my expectations where they were concerned. As summer arrived, I threw myself into college applications, fueled by Grandma's encouragement and Dad's long-distance support. I aimed high, applying to top-tier schools with strong business programs. When acceptance letters began arriving, I could hardly believe it. The real shock came when my top choice, a prestigious university known for its business management program, offered a full-ride scholarship. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking, as Grandma hooped and pulled me into a hug. "I knew you could do it, kiddo. All those late nights, all those competitions, they paid off." To celebrate, Grandma insisted on a small party, just the two of us, with fancy takeout from an Italian restaurant and a bottle of sparkling cider. She wasn't about to let me sip champagne, even if I was legally an adult. We were halfway through our meal, laughing over a story about her early days in the laundromat business, when the doorbell rang. Grandma frowned, clearly not expecting visitors. "I'll get it," I said, setting down my fork. When I opened the door, my stomach dropped. There stood Mom and Robert, her expression impatient, his arms crossed. Without so much as a greeting, they brushed past me into the house. "Mother, we need to talk about the company," Mom said, her voice sharp as she strode into the living room. She didn't glance my way, didn't ask about my graduation or college plans. It was as if I were invisible. "Why can't we access the main accounts?" she demanded. "And why are you blocking the transfer of capital to our subsidiary?" Grandma's eyes narrowed, her posture straightening. "Because it's not your decision to make anymore, Helen. The company belongs to Elizabeth now. She'll decide its future and manage its finances." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. I watched as a series of emotions flickered across Mom's face: shock, anger, then a calculated shift. Suddenly, her demeanor softened, her voice turning syrupy sweet. "Elizabeth, sweetheart, I've missed you so much. Why don't you come live with us?" I blinked, caught off guard by the abrupt change. She stepped closer, reaching for my arm, but I instinctively stepped back. "We've settled in so nicely in the new city," she continued. "We have a beautiful house, and there's a room just for you. We could set up a desk, get you a new computer for your studies and work." Her words felt rehearsed like a sales pitch. "No, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I'm happy here. I have my friends, my school, and Grandma needs me. Her smile faltered for a moment before she rallied. Well, if that's the issue, we could move back here. We could live in our old house, just like before. Wouldn't that be nice? I shook my head, my resolve hardening. It's not about the house, Mom. It's everything. I saw the anger building in her eyes, barely contained. Before she could respond, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me for months. Mom, why did you really divorce Dad? She stiffened, clearly caught off guard. Well, your father cheated on me multiple times. I was tired of it. He abandoned us for his mistress, didn't even pay alimony. That's not true, I said, my voice firm. Dad told me everything. There was only one time, and it was because of how you treated him. He didn't abandon us, you kicked him out. And he's been paying alimony regularly. Mom's face contorted with rage. How dare you, you ungrateful little brat. You have no right to meddle in my personal life. Everything here belongs to me, and I decide who lives where. Grandma, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward, her voice calm but laced with steel. That's quite enough, Helen. You seem to have forgotten a few key points. This house, the company, they belong to me, not you. I gave the company to Elizabeth because I trust her judgment far more than I trust yours. Right now, I think it's time for you to leave. I watched, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest, as Grandma firmly ushered Mom and Robert out. The door closed behind them with a final, resounding click. As we stood in the quiet aftermath, I felt a strange blend of sadness and relief. I'd lost the last illusions I had about my mother, but I'd gained clarity about my path forward and the knowledge that I wasn't alone. What now? I asked, my voice muffled against Grandma's shoulder as she pulled me into a hug. She stepped back, her eyes warm with a small smile. Now, we get back to celebrating your college acceptance. And tomorrow, we start planning for your future. Your real future, not the one your mother tried to force on you. The morning after the confrontation, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Curious, I crept down the stairs and peered into the living room. To my surprise, Dad was there, sitting on the couch, deep in conversation with Grandma. I joined them, and Grandma explained why she'd called him over. I've been thinking about Amy, she said, her tone serious. Your mother? Well, I'm not sure she's in the best position to care for her right now. I've suggested your father seek custody. My heart leaped with hope. Really, Dad? Are you going to do it? He ran a hand through his hair, looking both nervous and determined. Yeah, I am. It won't be easy, but Amy deserves better than what she's getting right now. I couldn't help myself. I threw my arms around him, whispering, Thank you, Dad. As we pulled apart, Grandma cleared her throat.
There's more, she said.
I've hired a private investigator to look into your mother and Robert's activities. There are discrepancies in the branch's financials that need explaining. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I exchanged a glance with Dad, a shared understanding passing between us. Whatever lay ahead, we'd face it together. Me, Dad, Grandma, and hopefully soon Amy. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a strange, yet invigorating rhythm. I dove into my college classes at the university, a sprawling campus with ivy-covered buildings and lecture halls buzzing with ideas. My business management courses demanded a focus I'd never tapped into before, and I threw myself into my studies with a determination that surprised even me. Textbooks became my constant companions, their pages dog-eared and margins scribbled with notes. Meanwhile, Dad started visiting Grandma's bungalow regularly, his presence a comforting anchor. Our conversations, once stilted by the weight of the past, grew easier, filled with shared laughter and tentative steps toward rebuilding what we'd lost. Having him back in my life felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized was missing. 3 weeks after Grandma's revelation about Amy's custody, she called Dad and me to her home office. The room, with its shelves of leather-bound ledgers and the faint scent of lavender from a diffuser, felt heavy with anticipation. Grandma's face was grave as she sat behind her oak desk, her hands folded tightly. The investigator's report came in, she said without preamble, her voice steady but laced with concern. And it's worse than we thought. She laid out the facts, each one landing like a blow. Mom had been unfaithful to Dad for years, long before their divorce. Her affair with Robert had begun while she was still married, documented by hotel receipts, credit card statements for extravagant gifts, and incriminating emails. But that was only the beginning. Robert is a con man, Grandma said, her voice hardening. He's done this before, seducing wealthy women, convincing them to shift assets, then vanishing with the money. My stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. Their push to transfer the company's capital to their branch hadn't been about expansion. It was a calculated plan to siphon funds and disappear. Grandma nodded at my expression.
Exactly.
He was planning to steal it and run. We sat in stunned silence, the weight of the betrayal settling over us. Finally, Grandma broke the quiet. We need to confront your mother with the truth. The meeting was arranged for the next day, and when Mom arrived at Grandma's house, her expression was one of barely concealed annoyance. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw Dad seated in the living room, his face a mask of quiet resolve. What followed was one of the most excruciating conversations of my life. Grandma presented the evidence with clinical precision. The affair, Robert's fraudulent history, their scheme to embezzle from the company. With each revelation, I watched Mom's face, searching for a flicker of remorse or accountability. Instead, I saw only denial. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered, her cheeks flushing. "Robert loves me. He would never do this. You're all just jealous of our happiness." Dad tried to reason with her, his voice calm but firm. "Helen, please look at the evidence. Think about Amy. Is this really the kind of man you want around our daughter?" But Mom was unyielding. She stood, her eyes blazing. "I don't have to listen to this. Robert is a good man, and I trust him completely. You're all trying to ruin my life." With that, she stormed out, the door slamming behind her with a force that rattled the windows. As we sat in the aftermath, I realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a long, arduous battle. But glancing at Dad and Grandma, their faces etched with determination, I knew I wouldn't face it alone. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turbulence. Dad, backed by Grandma's unwavering support and her lawyer's expertise, filed for custody of Amy. I tried to stay focused on my studies, attending lectures and burying myself in assignments, but the drama unfolding around me was impossible to ignore. The custody hearing was a grueling ordeal, and I insisted on being there, seated in the courtroom's stiff wooden pews. Mom's lawyer painted Dad as an absent father, but our attorney was prepared. He presented evidence of Dad's consistent alimony payments, his efforts to maintain contact with Amy and me, and the stability of his modest but welcoming apartment. Then came the bombshell, the investigators' report detailing Robert's fraudulent past and their plan to embezzle company funds. I watched Mom's face as the evidence was laid out. Shock gave way to anger, then a fleeting moment of vulnerability that made her look lost. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her almost. When the judge granted Dad full custody of Amy, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Relief flooded through me, tempered by sadness that it had come to this. As we left the courthouse, Amy nestled in Dad's arms. Mom approached, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over," she hissed. Grandma stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "Yes, Helen, it is. Go home." The fallout continued. The judge ordered Mom to pay child support for Amy, a reversal that visibly stunned her. She'd always assumed she'd be the one receiving support, not paying it. I immersed myself in my studies and the company's operations, trying to distance myself from the chaos. But I couldn't ignore the quiet satisfaction when I learned Robert had abandoned Mom, running off with another woman and a significant portion of Mom's personal savings. It was a bitter kind of justice. One crisp autumn evening, Dad called, his voice tight with emotion. "Your mother showed up at my place today," he said. "She wanted to reconcile, said she'd made a mistake, that she wanted us to be a family again." My heart clenched, a small, childish part of me longing for the family we'd once been. But I knew too much now. I told her no, Dad continued firmly. That ship sailed a long time ago, and I won't put you or Amy through that again. I let out a shaky breath. Good, I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. You deserve better, Dad. We all do. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, I could hear the smile in his voice. When did you get so wise, Lizzie? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. I learned from the best. Hanging up, I glanced around my room at Grandma's house. My desk was cluttered with textbooks and company reports, while a bulletin board displayed photos of me with Dad and Amy, their smiles bright against the cork. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned a year ago. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to face, decisions to make, a company to run. But it was real, and it was mine. I thought of Mom, now alone after her schemes and manipulations. A twinge of pity surfaced, but it was overshadowed by a sense of justice. She'd made her choices, and now she faced the consequences. As for me, I had a family that loved me, a company to lead, and a future brimming with possibilities. Time seemed to accelerate as I juggled college and the company. Before I knew it, I was halfway through my degree, my days a blur of lectures, study sessions, and late-night financial reports. But weekends were sacred. Every Friday, I'd pack a bag and drive to Dad's cozy apartment, where Amy, now 10 and all gangly limbs, would tackle me with a hug. Lizzie, she'd squeal, her energy boundless. Dad would emerge from the kitchen, often in a flour-dusted apron, grinning. Just in time for dinner, he'd say, stirring a pot of his famous spaghetti. Those weekends became my sanctuary. We'd eat together, Amy chattering about school, Dad, and I discussing company strategies. After Amy went to bed, we'd stay up late, poring over business plans, his experience guiding my vision. Sundays were reserved for Grandma's, where the aroma of roast chicken and apple pie filled her bungalow. After lunch, we'd sit on her porch, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves, talking about everything and nothing. I always knew you had it in you, Elizabeth, Grandma would say, squeezing my hand, her eyes warm with pride. As graduation approached, excitement mingled with apprehension. Dad had been true to his word, managing the company with skill while preparing me to take the helm. One evening, as we sat in his living room, the glow of a lamp casting soft shadows, he said, I'm ready to hand over the reins whenever you are, Lizzie. I hugged him tightly, my heart full.
Thank you, Dad.
For everything. Life wasn't perfect. There were challenges ahead, decisions about the company, my career, and Amy's future. But as I looked at my little family, Dad, Amy, Grandma, I knew we could face anything together. This path wasn't the one I'd expected, but standing at the threshold of my new life, I realized it was exactly where I was meant to be. Please feel free to comment below if you like this. Remember to like and subscribe for more.